After the shocking betrayal of my wife Sarah, I robbed her of what was most important to her. My name is Nathan, I'm 34, and until recently I thought I had everything I could dream of. A house in the suburbs of Chicago, a stable job as an engineer for a construction firm, 2 dogs, Rocky and Blaze, German shepherds we got in our 2nd year of marriage, and Sarah, my Sarah, the woman I met 8 years ago in a bar on the outskirts of town when she spilled a beer on me, apologizing so sincerely that I couldn't help but laugh. I'd never imagined then that this awkward brunette with brown eyes would become my wife, and I certainly couldn't have imagined she'd break my heart so badly that I'd sit up nights staring into the void, clutching a bottle of whiskey I wouldn't even open. It started 3 months ago. I noticed she was different. Sarah had always been outgoing, loved her nights out with her friends, Friday night cocktails at trendy downtown spots. I never minded. I liked that she had her own life, her own little joys, but at some point, she started staying out longer than usual. At first I put it down to work. She was an interior designer, and projects could drag on, especially if the client was picky. Then I started noticing her hiding her phone when I walked into the room. It wasn't immediately obvious, but over time, the little things started to add up to a picture that made my insides chill. She started smiling at the screen more often than she smiled at me. Her laugh, which I loved so much, now sounded somewhere off to the side as she sat on the couch, staring at her phone. I tried to convince myself that it didn't mean anything, that I was just thinking too much, but then I saw her quickly close the messages, only to have me come closer. It hadn't happened once or twice, it had become a pattern. One night I couldn't take it anymore. She'd fallen asleep, leaving her phone on the bedside table, and I picked it up, feeling like the last bastard. I knew the code. The day of our wedding, 0518, May 4th, 3 years ago. The screen lit up, and I opened her correspondences. There he was, some guy named Michael. The name didn't tell me anything, but the messages said everything. They were dating. 4 weeks. She texted him how much she missed him, how she wanted to be in his arms again. He texted her back with heart emojis and promises to see her tomorrow. Tomorrow was Thursday, the day she told me she'd be late for a client meeting. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at a sleeping Sarah, and felt something inside me break. This wasn't just texting. This was plans, places, times. This was another life I knew nothing about. I didn't wake her up. I didn't yell or throw the phone against the wall, like someone else probably would have. Instead, I put it back down, lay next to her, and stared at the ceiling. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there thinking about how things could have gotten to this point. I mean, we were happy, or so I thought. Every morning I made her coffee. Every Saturday we went for walks with the dogs along Lake Michigan. I even learned how to make her favorite cheesecakes, even though I hate making dough. And now this, Michael, who took my wife right out from under my nose, while I was too busy believing we were doing well. The next day, I decided to follow her. It was an impulsive decision, but I could no longer just sit back and wait for her to confess everything herself. She left in the morning as usual, kissing me on the cheek and telling me she'd be back late. I took the day off work, citing feeling unwell, and went to pick her up. She didn't go to the office. Instead, her car pulled up to a coffee shop a few blocks from our house, where he was waiting for her, tall, with dark hair, wearing a black leather jacket. They hugged, and I saw her smile at him in a way she hadn't smiled at me in a long time. They sat at a table by the window, and I watched them from the car parked across the street. My Sarah, my wife, was holding his hand and laughing. It was worse than just betrayal. It was like someone had cut a piece out of my life and replaced it with something foreign. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. At some point they got up and left, and I stayed. At home, I opened a bottle of bourbon and poured myself a glass, but I never drank it. Instead, I started thinking, not about how to get her back, that wasn't important anymore. I thought about what she loved more than anything else in the world. Sarah had always been obsessed with her image. Her Instagram was perfect, pictures in designer dresses, shots from our trips, her work, her dogs. She spent hours picking filters, building compositions, taking pride in every single like. It was her little empire, her way of feeling important. And that's when I realized what I was going to do. I wasn't going to make a scene or beg her to stay. I was going to take away what she valued most. Her perfect world was going to crumble. I decided that Sarah would lose her perfect world not overnight, but gradually, so that she would feel each blow. It wasn't just revenge, it was something deeper, like I wanted to make her see that she had destroyed not only my life, but her own illusion as well. The day after that coffee shop, I started planning. I Saturday in the living room, while Rocky and Blaze lay at my feet, looking at me with their big wet eyes as if they sensed something was wrong. Their presence was comforting, but couldn't drown out the rumbling in my head. I grabbed my laptop and opened her Instagram. Thousands of followers, hundreds of posts, all these carefully constructed shots of her perfect life. Our dogs against a sunset, her in an elegant dress at some event, me smiling next to her on a beach in Mexico 2 years ago. It was all a lie, or at least it was a lie now. The first thing I did was pick up the dogs. Sarah adored Rocky and Blaze, but they were registered to me. I picked them out. I paid for them. I took them to the vet while she was too busy with her projects. In the morning, I packed up their stuff, bowls, leashes, toys, even their favorite blanket. I called my brother Liam, who lived an hour away in the suburbs, and asked if he wanted to take the dogs for a couple weeks. He agreed without too many questions. Liam always knew when to stay out of the way. I drove Rocky and Blaze to his place, watching them happily run around his yard, unaware that their lives were changing too. When Sarah got home in the evening, she noticed the emptiness. I watched her face go pale as she walked around the house looking in every corner, until she finally stopped in front of me in the kitchen. I told her I'd given the dogs to a friend for a while because I needed to sort myself out. She looked confused, but didn't argue. Her eyes were full of questions, but I didn't give her any answers. Then I started with her work. Sarah was proud of her career as a designer. Her clients were wealthy people who paid her to make their homes look like the cover of a magazine. I knew her reputation was her everything. I had access to her work laptop because she often asked me to fix or update something. I logged into her email and found correspondences with current clients. There were drafts of projects, deadlines, agreements. I didn't delete anything that would have been too rude. Instead, I texted a few of her key clients from her account. The messages were polite but slightly careless, hinting that she was too busy and not sure if she could meet deadlines. One of them, some lawyer from north of town, responded almost immediately, clearly annoyed. I saw her later checking her mail and frowning, not sure what was going on. She tried to explain it away as a technical glitch, but I knew the seed of doubt had already been planted. The next step was her closet. Sarah spent a fortune on clothes, silk blouses, designer shoes, bags that cost more than my monthly salary. She liked to post pictures of herself wearing them, posing in front of a mirror or in front of some fancy restaurant. I waited until she left for another client meeting. Now I knew what that meant and packed half of her stuff. Not all of it so she wouldn't panic right away, but just enough for her to notice it was missing. I boxed them up and took them to a local charity store. There were a couple of her favorite dresses, the same shoes from some Italian brand she'd been saving for special occasions, and the bag she bought after her first big deal. When she got home and opened her closet, I watched her from the living room. She was going through things, going through hangers, her movements becoming more and more nervous. I sat her with a mug of coffee and pretended not to know anything. She asked if I'd seen her black dress, and I shrugged, saying that maybe she'd left it somewhere on the project. Her gaze turned glassy, but she remained silent. The hardest part was with her social media. I knew Instagram was her fortress. She could lose her docs, her clients, even part of her closet, but if her image crumbled, it would break her completely. I still had access to her passwords. She never changed them. Trusting me like an idiot, I logged into her account late at night while she slept in the next room. I didn't start deleting posts or writing something stupid that would have been too obvious. Instead, I started changing little things. Changed the captions under old photos to something slightly weird like "sometimes things aren't what they seem" or "life is a game." Unfriended half her friends, the ones she used to go to cocktails with. Blocked a couple clients who commented on her posts. They were small jazz, but I knew she'd notice, and she did notice. In the morning, I heard her muttering to herself while leafing through her phone at breakfast. Her fingers were shaking as she tried to figure out what was going on with her account. I felt no joy in it. Maybe someone else in my place would have gloated, but I felt nothing but emptiness. Every step I took her out of my life. But so did I. I looked across the table at her, this woman I loved more than anything in the world, and I didn't recognize her. She was still beautiful, her hair in a careless bun, her eyes a little puffy from lack of sleep, but now it was someone else's beauty. She didn't ask me anything directly. Maybe she was afraid of the truth, or maybe she already knew what I knew about Michael. I wasn't in a hurry to tell her. I wanted her to reach the edge herself, to let her perfect world collapse under its own weight. By the end of the week, she looked like a shadow of her old self. The dogs were gone. Clients started calling with questions. Her closet was melting down, and her Instagram account had turned into chaos. I knew this was just the beginning. I had one more plan. The biggest one. The one that was going to be the final blow. I was going to take away more than things or likes from her. I was going to take away her confidence that she could just walk away from the consequences. By the time I started to put my last plan into action, Sarah was already on edge. I could see it in her eyes. They'd lost the sparkle I'd once loved so much. She walked around the house like a ghost, constantly checking her phone, but not with the ease she used to. Her perfect world was cracking at the seams, and I knew it was time to deliver the final blow. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about making her realize that you can't wreck someone's life and get away with it. I wanted her to feel the same emptiness I'd felt when I found out about Michael, and I knew how to do that. All she had left was her connection to him. She may have lost her dogs, her closet, her clients, even part of her online image, but Michael was her anchor. I could see it in her behavior. She became even more secretive, left the house more often, and I was sure she clung to him like a lifeline. I decided to take that away from her, too, but not in the way one might expect. I wasn't going to make a scene or get into a feast fight with him. That would be too easy. Instead, I decided to destroy them from the inside out, using what I knew about Sarah better than anyone else. I started by gathering information. I had access to her phone. She'd never changed the password, apparently thinking I was too broken to do anything about it. I found their correspondences, which she wasn't even trying to hide now. They were planning to meet on Friday at some bar downtown. There were messages about how he couldn't wait to see her, how she wrote that she needed to snap out of it all. I saved the screenshots, but not to blackmail her. I didn't need to. Instead, I decided to play on her weaknesses. Sarah had always been obsessed with control. She liked everything to go according to her plan, from the way I was supposed to fold towels to the way she structured her career. I knew that if I planted doubts in her, she would start to destroy everything herself. I created a fake messenger account, nothing complicated, just an anonymous number that couldn't be linked to me. I texted Michael on behalf of a friend who was supposedly worried about him. The message was short but precise. I hinted that Sarah wasn't who she said she was, that she used people to make herself feel better, and that he wasn't the first person she'd done that to. I added a couple details about her life that only I knew, like her habit of ordering a martini with 2 olives, or how she rubbed her hair nervously when she lied. It had to look believable. I sent the message late at night and waited. The next day, Sarah came home earlier than usual. She looked worried, threw her bag on the couch, and went straight into the bedroom. Closing the door, I could hear her pacing back and forth, her footsteps quick and sharp. An hour later, she came out. Her face was red, her eyes glistening with tears. She didn't look at me, just walked to the kitchen and poured herself some water. I knew something had happened. Later, I checked her phone while she showered. The correspondence with Michael was short and chaotic. He asked if what was being said about her was true, asked for an explanation. She answered confusingly, denied everything, but her messages were full of panic. He stopped replying after she wrote that it was all lies and that she would explain when she met him. I realized that my plan had worked. He was starting to doubt her. On Friday, I decided to go all the way. I knew where they would meet, a bar called the 13th Floor, a fancy place with a view of the city. I got there early, Saturday, in a corner where I was hard to spot, and ordered a beer I never drank. When Sarah walked in, I barely recognized her. She was wearing one of her remaining dresses, but she looked tired. her movements nervous. Michael came in 10 minutes later, and I watched them sit down at a table by the window. At first everything was going fine, she was smiling. He was nodding, but then something changed. He started to look away. His posture became tense. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see her gesticulating, her hands shaking. At some point he stood up, threw the money on the table, and walked away. She remained seated, staring into emptiness, her shoulders slumped. I knew this was the end. Her anchor was lost. When she came home that night, I was in the living room with my laptop. She walked past me without a word and closed herself off in the bedroom. I could hear her crying quietly, muffled, but it was a sound I'll never forget. The next day, I packed my things. Not everything, just the essentials: clothes, a laptop, a couple books. I left her house because it didn't feel like mine anymore. I wrote a note, short and simple. I know about Michael. I'm leaving. The dogs are with me. I put it on the kitchen table and left for Liam's. Rocky and Blaze met me, tails wagging, and for the first time in weeks I felt something resembling relief. Sarah was alone, without her dogs, without her perfect career, without her perfect closet, without her online world, and finally without Michael. I don't know what she did after I left, and frankly, I didn't care. I took away everything that was important to her, not because I wanted to destroy her, but because I wanted her to understand that betrayal comes with a price. I didn't feel victorious, I just felt like I could finally exhale. Later, I learned from mutual friends that she was trying to make things better. She published new posts on Instagram, but they were a bit haggard. Without her former gloss, her clients left her. Her friends started calling her less often. She stayed in the house we once shared, but now it was empty. I don't know if she regrets what she did. Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. But I am sure of one thing: she will never look at her life the same way again. It's been a month since I left Sarah for Liam. I rented a small apartment a few miles from his house, nothing fancy, just a place to sleep, eat, and keep Rocky and Blaze. The dogs quickly got used to the new routine: morning walks along the river, evenings on the couch, where they'd climb into my lap with their heavy heads in my lap. Work helped, too. I took on more projects, stayed late in the office, so I wouldn't be alone with my thoughts for too long. Life was starting to level out, but I knew that somewhere out there, in our old house, Sarah was still dealing with the wreckage of what she'd destroyed. I didn't follow her specifically, but rumors were coming out. General acquaintances who used to be closer to her than to me started to tell. At first it was little things. She stopped posting to Instagram as often. Her account, once full of life, now looked abandoned. Then I heard that she lost another major client, the same lawyer I'd written to on her behalf. He had cancelled his contract, citing unprofessionalism, and that must have been the last straw for her reputation. Her friends, the ones who used to drag her to bars and take pictures for stories, also began to drift away. One of them, Caitlin, even called me one night to ask if I was okay. She said Sarah was out of it, and that no one understood what was going on with her. I didn't go into details, just thanked her for her concern and hung up. But the real clarity came when I got the letter, a plain paper letter in an envelope with her handwriting on it. It was in my mailbox 6 weeks after I'd left. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it, feeling my heart beat faster than I would have liked. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in her neat handwriting. She didn't apologize or beg to come back. Instead, she wrote that she knew I'd done everything, that I had taken the dogs, undermined her job, ruined her closet, her social media, and even her relationship with Michael. She didn't blame me. Her tone was flat, almost cold. She wrote that she was angry at first, then she cried, and then she just sat her day down and realized she deserved it, that she had ruined us by thinking only of herself, and that she was now reaping the rewards. She revealed that Michael had left her for good after that night at the bar. He said he couldn't trust her, that someone she never found out, who had opened his eyes to her real face. She'd tried to win him back, but he'd changed his number and disappeared from her life. Without him, she was left all alone. The house we shared was now too big for her alone, and she planned to sell it. The dogs she loved to photograph no longer ran around the yard, and that, she said, was the hardest part. She wrote that she sometimes hears them barking in her sleep and wakes up hollow. She added at the end that she didn't blame me for what I had done, and that she hoped I would find peace. I folded the letter and put it away in my desk drawer. I don't know what I expected, maybe anger, maybe satisfaction, but there was none of that, just silence. I went to the kitchen, poured myself some coffee, and Saturday by the window, watching Rocky and Blaze play with a ball in the yard. They were happy, and that was all that mattered. Sarah got what she deserved, but I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt like I was finally free. A couple days later, I happened to see her car outside the supermarket. She was getting out with packages, alone, wearing an old gray sweater that she would never have worn in public before. Her hair was gathered into a careless ponytail. Her face was makeup-free, and she looked smaller than I remembered her. She didn't notice me, and I didn't bother to call out. I got in my car and drove away, realizing that this was probably the last time I'd ever see her. It was clear. Sarah had lost everything that made up her world, her career, her image, her dogs, her love. She was left with an empty house and the realization that it was her own fault. I didn't bring her back. I didn't forgive her, and I didn't take my revenge further. I just walked away and took my life back. Rocky and Blaze slept at my feet that night, while I stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in months, I fell asleep without thoughts of her. The story was over, not with a loud finale, but with the quiet but definitive click of the door closing.